Hello. My name is George Stein. I currently do trade surveillance at Bank of America with a team that's focused on regulatory response. In interest of full disclosure, I used to work for Jeff Loeb here, who was with Deutsche Bank, so we have a slight connection there. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up the team if I could. Come on up, and I'll have you introduce yourselves. So starting closest, Srini, would you like to give an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Srini Masanam. I'm Global Head of Data Quality Governance at Citibank. I oversee data and surveillance consumption for all aspects, trade, comms, retail, client conflict. So it's pretty exciting, particularly in the recent events on data quality and governance.
I'm Fahreen Kurji. I'm the Chief Customer Intelligence Officer at Behavox. I oversee ensuring that we're able to feed what our customers are saying and what regulators are talking about back to product, revenue, and marketing teams.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Loeb. I work at Deutsche Bank in the compliance department. I have a couple of different roles. I'm the global head of communication surveillance, and I run the surveillance program in North America.
Great, thank you very much. So without further ado, let's dive into the questions today. You will be able to ask questions through the mobile app, and I believe someone will be roaming with a microphone a little bit later as well. Firstly, what market dynamics are impacting the need for enhanced communications surveillance in 2024? I believe I have Jeff up first.
Sure. This is an interesting question. I think most of us can probably relate to it in different ways, but I would say to get started, it really depends on what is the regulatory environment at your firm, at your bank. How large is it? How complex is it? What is going on? Where are you feeling pressure? And that kind of sets the tone for what type of enhancements you need. What kind of fines do you think you might see? What's happening on the street? And that generally sets the tone for how you enhance your communications. We've certainly seen over the last year or a few years, right, there's a lot of different topics across communications and trade, right, whether it was the fines from JP Morgan for trade surveillance with venues and data, or whether it was the business messaging fines related to communication surveillance. I think most of us in this room have probably gotten requests or been dealing with a lot of these things. So it's no secret, but I think between what's happening there and the pressures externally help you try and determine like what your book of work is. So while you might have something planned out going into 2024, it's important that sometimes you need a pause, take a look at what's coming in, and you might have to shift or change all of your priorities, right? So, we've been dealing with a lot of that over the last 12 to 18 months.
Very good. Srini, would you have a perspective?
I just want to add a couple of things. The regulatory fines that had been imposed 2023 for unauthorized communication channels and 2024 for the trade surveillance, it's creating an environment where firms have to embrace, again, Gen AI and technological advancements is creating an environment for 2024 and beyond for us to innovate. That also actually stifling competition and a lot of vendors coming up with very innovative products where we can deliver things more effectively, efficiently at a lower cost. I think that's pretty important for us.
And Fahreen, any perspective?
Just leaning into what Srini said in regards to unauthorized communication channels, I think that's something that we saw most of our clients and prospects looking to ensure that they can get in front of before the next set of fines roll out. We know that it's specifically or has been focused on the US markets, but we know that that's going to trickle down into some of the European markets as well, and regulators are also really focused on how they can ensure that you have the right solutions in place to mitigate those problems.
Very good. For a second question, what are some examples of successful surveillance strategies that have effectively prevented or detected financial misconduct? And let's start with Srini on this one, please.
Again, leading on the technological innovations that has helped us improve the legacy models, which were primarily on the lexicon based. So we have come up with a sentimental model where we can identify the sentiment intent of the actors who are part of that communication. And then so that way we can identify and eliminate false positives. That has been a significant area of investment. So we have been building and continuously improving through data, high quality data as we produce further, continuously train the models to hone in on identifying the right actors, identifying the misconduct and appropriate to the right people, and then escalate it in timely manner. I think those are the areas that we are able to significantly improve over the last year and a half.
Very good. Srini, Jeff, Fahreen, any perspectives from your end?
Yeah, I think from a vendor perspective, successful surveillance strategies sit in multiple verticals. Obviously, there's integrated approach to combining technology and expertise, but just talking maybe specifically about use case that I see quite often coming through is a lot of clients specifically are looking to go beyond what's just within their domain. So when you see the traditional compliance model, you've got someone in compliance who's escalating to CCO and then looking at what the results of those are and acting on them. What we're seeing more is this idea of an integrated holistic surveillance approach, which is having a surveillance team versus a compliance team, having a team that sits across multiple areas and they're escalating towards HR or escalating to legal or escalating to compliance or escalating across the board. And so when you're looking at that surveillance strategy, you're looking at individuals who understand that an issue isn't just an issue within one department or one team. Usually it sits across multiple. So being able to feed in communication from many avenues and looking at it holistically and understanding that there actually could be risk in other areas of a company that come from compliance is, I think, where we're seeing that surveillance strategy going.
Very good.
Yeah, it's good to hear that. We're certainly aligned with both of you, particularly as it relates to like our global communications program. We don't. There's no silver bullet, right? Whether it's a mix of machine learning, risk-based sampling, right? So we might work with investment banking compliance or the control room to figure out where a deal may have been added late to the watch list or someone was wall crossed inappropriately. We'll go back and do our own bespoke search. We do random sampling on those, whether it's lexicons that are based off of all the different risk types that we cover. Like, we don't just rely on one of those. We have a mosaic approach, and we feel like that works the best. I probably left a few different things out there, but as it relates to the escalation and the holistic model, like we don't have one tool that sits on top of all of trade and all of comms. We do have the ability for no matter what team you sit on, whether it's trade or comms, they're essentially integrated. But there is no just one system that overlooks everything. We feel like while we might be trying to achieve that in the future, we're just not there yet. And because the teams are so closely connected, when someone on the trade side sees something interesting, they have the ability to dive right in on comms or voice and do a search or reach out to someone on the business or someone who covers the business directly on the compliance side and ask additional questions. You know, everything gets stored essentially in a homegrown case manager tool that includes probably a lot more information than we really needed to include. But we've certainly come a long way.
Yeah, I echo what Jeff has highlighted, and particularly for large firms where we have grown through acquisitions and so on, and there is always a drive to kind of generate revenue and go on, right? So the recent regulatory environment has helped the firms to bring all these islands of data together and multiple case systems, they are not talking to each other together. And trade surveillance has its own case system, and then comm surveillance has its own case system, and then bringing them together, we could look at, as Jeff highlighted, the holistic view of what's happening from the trade side, comm side. Is there any correlation between those observations? So that way, we can improve the compliance and mitigate the risk for the firm.
We even take it as far as like having weekly meetings with the product groups between trade and comms to highlight interesting things that are going on, right? So we get together in a room for an hour. What are you seeing? What's interesting? Did you do holistic search on some of these interesting trades? Have you guys been talking to one another? Have you talked to the desk? What's going on? Like, we just don't end it at the alert generation. We try and dive in, particularly for things that don't seem black and white. For closing with a no action, anything that essentially requires a bit more than that, we try and dive into a little bit more.
And
I was going to say knowledge sharing is a big deal. Go ahead.
I think also the next step to that is what happens after you've got that knowledge sharing and looking at the holistic piece. So what we end up seeing quite often is the piece after you've got your alerts, you've got you know what's going on, but how are you reporting on it? And then how are you actually acting on it? From the perspective of successful strategies that we see, quite often it comes down to how are you then influencing the culture of an organization to change, to ensure that you're actually using those insights to further progress the company itself. One of the things that we see quite often is something called reverse escalations. So on the back of the alerts being generated, some of these insights being showcased, we see teams looking to pull out, for example, if there's trend analysis and they see that there's an increase of conduct issues over the past 6 months, and those conduct issues specifically are around inappropriate language or something along those lines, they know they can create team building or a policy or send out emails or some sort of training around that. And what they see as a result of that is individuals almost proclaiming that, hey, we did something wrong, and that would be a reverse escalation for them. What they see over an extended period of time then is the cultural shift in the organization, where they're not seeing as many escalations or issues from a trend analysis perspective because they've combated it from a policy perspective, or from the ability to actually start shifting cultural change within the organization itself.
Reverse escalation, that's a good term. I'm going to keep that one. Let's go to the dark side. What are some examples of recent failures, and what lessons can be drawn from them? Jeff, I think I have you up on this.
Sure. So I have an easy example that's pretty much been where it's been consuming my life for the last 3 to 4 years, and that's business messaging fines that a lot of firms have paid. And even a few weeks ago there was another set announced by the SEC, another 10 or so firms that paid fines. But we were one of the first firms that paid a large fine. A lot of firms kind of handled business messaging the same way prior to the settlements, and that was by policy, right? So every firm had a policy that said you can only use approved channels to communicate with the activities you're doing with your clients. But that wasn't essentially good enough. The SEC essentially came out, and the CFTC came out, and they literally said you have to give your employees tools to do their jobs effectively, right? So if your bank or your firm did not offer that type of tool, if you didn't have mobile devices with SNS enabled, or you didn't have a way to instruct employees if they had an off-channel business message to send that back in to the archive so it was retained, you're most likely hit with a fine. And we've been kind of living through very large change initiatives at the bank, whether it's policy, culture. Culture is a big part of it, right? Getting the culture right, making sure especially client-facing staff understand what it means and why record retention is so important, And if you don't get the culture and training right, you're never going to get it right. You know, we've spent a lot of money rolling out a tool with a vendor that's actually here today to give staff that need it a way to communicate effectively in a compliant manner, and that allows us to retain and surveil. But one of the things we're really seeing is that we have quite low usage, right? So it's either a mix because, you know, the culture change is there, meaning staff they're scared to use it, right? Because they've been told no text messaging, even though they now have a compliant way to do it. Or, you know, their clients don't want to use it, or their clients are not allowed to use it because they don't have a compliant way to use it if you send them a text message. So, you know, there's been certainly a lot of education and learning that we've been doing on this space over the last few years, but I would say this is where I've been spending a lot of my time.
Fahreen, Srini, any thoughts?
Yeah, just to add a couple of other areas on why innovation and modernization is important. In the recent, just adding to a couple of more areas regulators have been looking at are supervision, like insufficient supervision. That means if you don't get the data, I think don't get the data, complete messages, charts, comprehensive view of all the multi-channels you have for both communications and trades. If you don't bring the data, you don't supervise. So that's another area very important for us. And the second is the lexicons and some of the legacy tools that the people still are using. They are not being updated in a timely manner, right? You know, not keeping that list up to date, and then the firms had been fined for that. So I think that kind of underlines why looking at modernization, innovation, and looking at what some of the vendors had been doing. You know, we always look out, although our program is pretty much internal, but we also look at what our vendor partners have been doing. So that had been very helpful for us to kind of see whether we need to buy or build, right? So that's a decision we continuously look at as looking at the success and failures in the industry.
I think the important part from a technology perspective is also the adaptability of new risks. There is so much change that's been happening just the past year, whether it's something as small as ChatGPT or just within the surveillance space, moving from lexicon to more artificial intelligence surveillance, being adaptable to new risks, whether that's unauthorized communication channels, or if that's something like video or images, being able to get ahead of the curve and know that that's coming down the line. Fines are probably going to come down in 6 months or a year or 2 years. How are we monitoring for it? How are we surveilling for it? Do we have a solution in place? Do we know what our strategy is? Do we have policies that we've built for it? What does that look like 6 months in advance of anything actually happening? So when you are approaching, whether it's a fine in your case, Jeff, or whether you're just approaching what your strategy looks like, being able to know that as a company we've made a decision and we know what we're doing, so the next 6 months are a lot smoother versus scrambling last minute to try and find a solution.
Very good. Let's explore the holistic area a little bit more. What tools are available for organizations to better gain a holistic view of all activity? And I believe this is for Fahreen.
I think Jeff and I will interplay this one a little bit, but I think from a vendor perspective, what tools you're overlaying come down to, are you able to really, looking at the use case we talked about before, are you able to rebrand to something like business intelligence? And if you're able to do that, are you overlaying case management with information reporting, with surveillance, with trade? How does that look like holistically? I know we talked a lot about holistic surveillance already, but I know within your organization, you guys use multiple tools that you're highlighting.
Yeah, you know, within, you know, we're a very large, complex organization. We have great technology teams that we partner with, and the approach we've been taking over the buy versus build has been something that we've really been quite transformative with since I started there 7 years ago, where we had tons of vendor products, whether it was a case manager, an engine for for alert management, whether it's trade or e-coms, and then a search engine that might sit on top of it that we were using for something that came along with the product. And now, we have really evolved where across all of trade and comms, we only have one product that we use now, and that is our engine that we use for e-coms. Everything else is homegrown. So the alert management that the teams use to review the alerts, it's spectacular. I mean, it's nothing short of it's really, we spend a lot of time creating this and getting it right. So it really helps the teams, think about what they're looking at. It's extremely user-friendly, has a great UI. That connects directly to, their escalation process, whether they're forwarding it to someone in the first line, the alert, or to somebody more senior in compliance as they escalate it. And then that all gets stored in a homegrown case manager tool that, collects all different types of data that go along. So when internal audit or compliance testing or someone externally comes and wants to look at it, we have everything tied up nicely with a bow. And on top of that, as we're going through and doing the doing our reviews, we have this homegrown search engine. So as we go in, we can, do custom searches looking for things, not just for things that trigger, but essentially like a Google search bar that sits on top of it that allows us to go back 18 months and search over any message that was sent if you're a monitored employee. So that makes, while you see things interesting on the trade side, that tool is widely available to everyone on the trade side and the comm side to go in and do deep dives.
Very good.
We find that extremely valuable, and the regulators like the fact that we have it as well.
Fahreen, any counterpoint thoughts, or are you good with that?
Well, Jeff and I have talked about this multiple times, so we're aligned on that. But I think just from a tools for holistic surveillance and holistic surveillance in general, one of the pieces that we're seeing become quite popular is not just your surveillance tools, but also your education tools, where we've built specialized LLM models to actually have a financial version of GPT to actually be able to put in your policies and run Policy Manager, as well as ask specific questions of it from a specialized perspective. We see that becoming more popular for the pre-surveillance tools, which is, are your teams educated? Are they up to date? Do they know what they're looking at? Especially L1 review. I think overlaying that with all the tools then gives you something that's a little more robust.
Yeah.
And Fahreen, your firm built their own large language model.
We did, yes. Yeah, so we recently, over the last couple years, spent a lot of time building our own large language model. In the most layman terms, essentially, if you're thinking about something like ChatGPT, what that is a large language model that has everything that exists in the internet on it. So you're putting in everything from Wikipedia to every single Reddit thread to how to write a poem on Robert Frost and a letter to your mother. All of that probably not as relevant for compliance teams or for financial institutions. So what we did is we stripped out all of that irrelevant information and we dropped in every type of regulatory website, all of the misconducts, all of the regulators, all of their handbooks, and then a lot of SME data and a lot of communication data from our clients that was anonymized. And so what you get on the back of that is a very specialized model. So when you ask it something from translate what this Bloomberg chat actually means to can you explain a specific insider trading issue to me, to here are all my policies within a firm, can you please translate those into what that looks like for these specific true positives. It's able to actually look at it from a financial specialized perspective versus this is what I think it is. I mean, I won't go on about it too much. We're outside and there's people demoing it, so you can take a look at it.
Very good. Thank you. What use cases are you seeing for AI in the communications surveillance arena, and how do you envisage this transforming over the coming years? Fahreen, I believe, starts on this.
I can do, yes. I mean, outside of what I just talked about in regards to specialized LLM models that I think are going to be more and more popular in multiple fields and not just within the financial institutions, I think what's going to be use cases that we're going to see more and more often outside of languages and voice is probably more image and video. Languages and voice definitely are going to be a focus, as they always have been, but there's more and more emphasis on translation capabilities and transcription capabilities, being able to interlay that into all areas of your communication surveillance platforms. Voice for sure. I think, again, when it comes to multiple languages within voice as well, not just how are we actually transcribing your voice calls, but how are you actually doing that across languages? How are you doing that with accuracy? And then definitely, I think with the amount of Zoom calls and video platforms that are happening, I think video and images are going to be the next wave of, are you monitoring this? How are you monitoring it? Do you have a surveillance solution for it? And how are you actually transcribing some of that?
Very good. Jeff, Srini, any thoughts?
Yeah, from the firm's point of view, we are really excited about AI. You know, Gen AI has generated a lot of excitement, but however, we have been using static dynamic AI for the last several years in identifying. But we are, as we look forward, the predictive analytics are going to get better. You know, we can look at the behaviors and identify. We can even foresee some other risks as we build a holistic surveillance and identify the actors who have been doing. You know, if you look at the risks in a silo, you may observe one thing here, but if you look at holistically, you might observe one here, one there, and another one, some other risk spectrum. So that gives you a comprehensive view of an internal trader or external client or all aspects. In addition, this advanced technologies are helping us integrate with the other aspects of the compliance, AML, and fraud detection, and things like that. So we are really excited about integrating these technologies in the next 3 to 5 years.
Very good. That's
AI is a tricky one. You know, I probably get asked 10 times a week from different people across the bank, what kind of AI are you guys using in surveillance? You know, so if we're talking about Copilot or ChatGPT, we're just not there yet. But, you know, we do have a fairly sophisticated voice surveillance product that uses you know, Google's Chirp model, where we essentially transcribe every single voice recorded conversation for a high-risk population that gets run through our natural language and our NLP models, as well as custom-built lexicon models that focus on how folks would generally communicate over the phone, which is definitely different than how you would communicate over email or chat. And the accuracy on it is kind of mind-blowing. You know, we're seeing like accuracy levels at like 90% plus. And, you know, this has allowed us to pivot from a phonetic lexicon tool that we used and rolled out 7 years ago to covering, you know, a couple hundred people, to now allowing us to cover a couple of thousand of our high-risk staff. And also have a lot more coverage, because you need to spend a lot of time developing phonetic lexicon models. And there's a lot of tweaking that's involved there with false positives. This allows you to essentially transcribe, run it through your lexicons or your machine learning models, and also you know, just trigger on things that are interesting. So it's really allowed us to really expand our coverage in a way we weren't sure we'd ever be able to. So I call that AI when anybody asks me.
You know, we talk about the benefits of AI, but also, you know, where we are AI, IBM spokesperson has highlighted some of those. EU AI Act has come, but however, in US, we don't have a regulation. Financial services particularly require that guardrails. You do something, and can you explain that? How did you get to that result? How did you identify that that person or a client or whoever the case may be? I think explainability is pretty important for us. That's where we are kind of struggling a bit, whether it's a vendor solution or in-house solution. I think going forward, but looking at the research and happenings in the industry, everybody is marching toward. Everybody recognizes that explainability, particularly in the regulated industry, financial services, healthcare, and so forth. It's absolutely important. Ethically, AI is important. So all these are aspects industry is working pretty hard on, and looking at adoption, which has rapidly increased in a year. I think we look forward to kind of getting solutions sooner to the market. Fahreen, it's all on you.
I think what we're waiting to see is from a regulator perspective what ends up happening. To Srini's point, the AI EU Act has just come out over the past 6 months. What happens from that perspective and how individuals or companies actually change their programs to suit that is going to be important to see. I think most regulators are technology neutral. They're taking a wait and see approach, but the SEC is a bit unique in that way where they have proposed a draft rules for AI related conflicts of interest. So what happens from the SEC perspective in regards to AI will be the next step. And then outside of that, other regulators, FINRA, CFTC, I believe OCC as well, they have emphasized strong governance, transparency, regular audits, and then model risk management to mitigate AI risks. And so from that perspective, regulators are trying to get smart about how they look at AI, what actually happens in that space, and how they actually implement it. I think they're being a little more cautious in actually putting down firm rules. But I see the AI EU Act changing a lot of that, and they're going to have to move faster if it is coming to Europe.
I've seen the terms explainability and reproducibility come up, but I haven't seen any specifics, and I haven't seen anything address model drift.
Yeah.
So on and so forth.
I think one regulation that is probably important for most people in the room to read is SR 11.7. It's been around for almost over 7 years at this point, but they talk a lot about model risk validation and explainability and how that should be implemented in compliance solutions.
Very good. We have questions. Thank you for contributing questions. This is open to the panel, okay? What are some of the biggest roadblocks to maintaining communications compliance in 2024? So roadblocks.
Model risk management.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think definitely we spoke about the regulatory aspects where although we are excited about the new technologies, I think the guardrails are important. But other roadblocks are related to the training and understanding of these models, because I think the technologists can build superb models, but if the analyst who he or she looking at that alert can't explain to regulators, it's no good. So I think having proper training and encouraging the culture of compliance across the organization is important.
I agree. One of the things we've noticed is that there isn't enough communication between level 1 and SMEs. There has to be like an ongoing communication there to teach the level 1s what they're looking at. Any other thoughts, guys? That one? Good to go? Okay, let's move on. What are some of the best strategies you have seen firms take with their communications surveillance? So like best in show type setups.
So what we've specifically seen, I would say the hedge fund space, specifically Chicago-based hedge fund. Well, maybe not so much Chicago-based anymore, but they created something called a war room, which was specifically around holistic surveillance. It's where they took the approach of being able to look at every risk, not just within compliance, but look at every risk holistically, look at the trend analysis of it, and see where they can measure across the board where they're having specific issues. So going back to the example before as well, how are they shifting changes in each arena, from conduct to compliance to insider threat to collusion to insider risk, whatever it might be, HR, legal, and look at that as one issue and one surveillance problem.
Very good.
I think at a smaller place, it's certainly a lot easier to do that. But when you have 90,000 employees, and you got to try and figure out who really needs to be surveilled, and what are their roles, what are the responsibilities, where do you have regulatory or legal requirements to do it. So you got to be a little bit more thoughtful about that. Otherwise, I'll have like 20,000 people working in e-com surveillance somewhere, and nobody wants to pay for that. But I think what you're talking about is right. Like, you got to understand kind of the risks that you cover, figure out how relevant they are to the products and the businesses that you cover, and then develop things that are quite bespoke so they make sense. That's the approach we try and take in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, Jeff highlighted the voice innovations that have happened. I think that is absolutely critical for a large firm like ours with 80 different countries, multiple languages, ability to kind of translate that and then translate even the trade into trade reconstruction from voice. That is also pretty important for us. I think innovations I am seeing in the industry, vendors bringing up as using the new technologies, they are very exciting in the market. I think they will further hone in and then help the firms improve the surveillances there.
Very good. Last question we have so far is, how can firms ensure communication surveillance doesn't become too intrusive that staff float to off-channel communication methods? I think you were touching on this, Jeff, with the platform that you put in place that people were reluctant to use.
Yeah, I mean, there is no requirement to have your personal conversations over an approved channel, right? But what we found, and the way we created our policies, is that sometimes we find that client-facing staff have business and personal relationships, right? And so while I might be having dinner with a client saying, I'm going to be 20 minutes late, the client might respond to me saying, oh, by the way, what happened with that trade, right? And that's a slippery slope, right? And I think all of us that have been kind of dealing with this over the last few years can relate to exactly that question and how do you handle it. So I think, firms need to make a decision in their policy, and your policy either needs to be very black and white and say you can have no communications if it's related to an activity of the bank, or if you do, you can have logistical conversations. You can have administrative types of conversations that don't otherwise require or have a retention requirement or a surveillance requirement. But the example I gave earlier is where you have create a slippery slope. And we decided to take an approach to make it more black and white and say you can't do anything unless it's over an approved channel, so or if it's personal.
Yeah, just to add to that, with the hybrid work environment, you have personal computers to personal devices to company provider. It's pretty difficult for a firm, any firm, to kind of bring all those communications into one place and then conduct surveillance on it. I think the more important, as I highlighted earlier, the training. What is right thing to do, what is not right thing to do. Clear examples providing to the everyone in the organization, particularly large organizations, so that require mandated training for everyone to take it. And second, instilling culture of compliance. I think we have seen what happens if people go entrepreneurially use some off-channel communications. Firms have been fined $2 billion. And they have consent orders and all those things. That impacts firms' reputation. I think instilling that culture of compliance and then encouraging teams to understand what's right thing to do and not right thing to do, I think that would be helpful, goes a long way, in addition to kind of continuous technology platform improvements.
I think from our perspective, what Jeff was saying, resonates quite a bit. But looking at communication surveillance, not just from the old historical lexicon approach and looking at it from an AI lens, is I think where some of those issues can be mitigated. Being able to look at sentences versus just specific words, looking at it from what those communications can create in terms of a picture for you. When you focus a lot on the lexicon approach, you do have the random, and what happened about that trade, because you're looking for those specific words. But when you're looking at it from, did someone take that communication offline? What are the patterns? Do they normally do that? How do they communicate with each other? How are they communicating with their clients? How are they communicating in general, internally and externally? Then you're able to look at it from the perspective of, okay, those are offline communications because they make sense from a pattern perspective, versus that's just the way someone communicates.
Very good. Well, in the interest of time, so that we can transition to the next presentation, I think we'll cut it off there. How about a round of applause for our esteemed panel? And thank you so much for your questions and your attention, and have a great day. Thank you.